During the First World War, American sailors found a clever way to stay afloat by practicing how to wrap their sleeping mattresses into makeshift life vests, turning basic bedding into a vital tool for survival on the open sea. Deep in the frozen woods of Belgium during late December 1944, American Sherman tanks sat cloaked beneath the winter canopy, waiting in silent defiance against the German advance during the pivotal and brutal Battle of the Bulge. In the year 1942, American women stood shoulder to shoulder on the assembly lines, their skilled hands and shared determination building the massive aircraft that would soon take flight to support the global war effort from home. Driving through England in the early 1950s, Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Edward Richer turned heads in a custom car he meticulously crafted from a Ford chassis spare, Austin parts and fuel tanks salvaged from a scrapped Lockheed. Off the coast of Hawaii's Kahului Island in April 1965, the USS Atlanta stood dangerously close to a massive 500-ton TNT blast during Operation Sailor Hat, testing the structural limits of naval steel against the sheer force of heat. Drifting silently above the New York City skyline in 1933, the massive USS Macon dirigible offered a breathtaking and rare glimpse of aviation grandeur as it soared over the growing urban landscape during the height of the airship era. Witness the powerful moment at the Brooklyn Navy Yard on October 7, 1904, when the heavy hull of the USS Nebraska first tasted the waters sliding down the ramps as a new symbol of American naval strength and engineering. Staring out over a sea of marching soldiers in the 1970s, Ugandan dictator Idi Amin reviewed his military parade with an air of absolute authority that defined his long and controversial reign over the East African nation. Huddled together near Voronezh in 1941, a Ukrainian mother holds her two young sons close as the shadows of war stretch across their homeland, capturing a poignant moment of maternal protection amidst the uncertainty of the Eastern Front. Standing as a testament to the elegant architecture of 1915, this grand Queen Anne-style house in Shakopee, Minnesota, served as a proud family home with its intricate woodwork and sweeping porches overlooking the quiet Midwestern landscape. Driven by a desperate need to pass his exams in 1905, a student at the University of Madras tied his long hair to a wall nail so that any sudden nod toward sleep would result in a sharp, wakeful tug. Perched precariously atop the University of Pittsburgh's Cathedral of Learning on October 13, 1960, ecstatic students cheered as they looked down upon Forbes Field to witness the historic drama of the World Series unfolding far below. From the deck of his command ship in 1944, Vice Admiral Richmond K. Turner kept a watchful, disciplined eye on the horizon as Allied forces launched their intense and strategic invasion of the heavily defended island of Saipan. Following the news of President Clinton's impeachment in December 1998, Vice President Al Gore took a steadying breath and gathered his thoughts before stepping forward to address a somber and expectant White House staff during a political crisis. With animated gestures and a focused gaze, Soviet pilot Viktor Radkovich recounted his daring mid-air maneuvers to fellow airmen in 1942, explaining exactly how he forced a German Luftwaffe plane to land deep behind Soviet lines. Desperate for freedom in 1975, Vietnamese boat people abandoned everything they knew to climb the side of the USS Durham, seeking a new life away from communism as the world watched the tragic end of the conflict. Following the heavy fighting in 1968, a Vietnamese father carried his small children through the scarred streets of Hue, returning to a city transformed by war, yet driven by the enduring hope of finding a place to call home. The bustling streets of London in 1957 come alive in this view of a city rebuilding its spirit, where classic black cabs and red buses navigated the historic corners of a capital entering a vibrant new era of modern life. Captured from behind French lines in 1870, this rare perspective shows lines of German skirmishers steadily advancing toward French positions at La Moncelle during the decisive and bloody Battle of Sedan that changed the course of European history. Looking every bit the suave detective in a 1950 publicity photo, Vincent Price prepared to voice the iconic Simon Templar for NBC's radio series, bringing the sophisticated charm of the saint to listeners across the nation through the airwaves. Operating within the legal boundaries of Germany until 1980, members of the neo-Nazi group WSG Hoffmann are seen here around 1978, representing a controversial and extremist element of the country's post-war political and social landscape. Amidst the chaos of the Second World War, a weary soldier found a brief moment of humanity and joy as he crouched down to play with a litter of stray puppies, finding comfort in their innocence during the conflict. Steadfast and defiant, in 1940, French resistance fighter René Dalmon stood as a symbol of the underground movement, risking his life in the early days of the occupation to sabotage Nazi efforts and keep the hope of liberty alive. Carrying heavy wooden trench clubs known as Grabenkuhl, these German officers moved through the mud of France in 1915, prepared for the brutal and primitive hand-to-hand combat that defined the life in the trenches of the Great War. In the final months of the Great War in September 1918, Allied forces pushed forward through the shattered landscape to capture the Saint-Mihiel salient, marking a major turning point that signaled the beginning of the end for the enemy. Emerging from the smoke and thunder of April 9, 1917, Canadian machine gunners manned their posts at Vimy Ridge, participating in a legendary battle that would eventually become a defining moment of national identity and military achievement. In a scene that highlights the grim realities of the front lines in 1917, a soldier endures the agonizing pain of a tooth extraction without the comforts of modern medicine, proving that survival required courage in every possible form. The streets of Paris surged with tension on August 1, 1914, as a massive crowd gathered outside the offices of Le Matin to read the proclamation of global mobilization that signaled the start of a devastating world war. Deep in the field of battle, a specialized unit manages the vital flow of information through World War II communication equipment, ensuring that orders reach the front lines even when the world around them was falling into chaos. Between January and May of 1944, the historic monastery of Monte Cassino was reduced to rubble as Allied armies fought a grueling campaign against German forces entrenched along the high mountain road leading toward the city of Rome. In the mid-1960s, Walt Disney climbed aboard a prototype boat for the Pirates of the Caribbean ride in Southern California, personally overseeing the development of what would become one of the most beloved attractions in theme park history. Surrounded by eager volunteer expeditionaries in Tampa, Florida, a Cuban Revolutionary Party recruitment officer organized his forces around 1895, preparing a brave group of men to set sail and fight for Cuba's independence from colonial rule. Moving stealthily through the rugged terrain of Pinar del Rio around 1896, Major General Pedro Antonio Diaz Molina of the Cuban Liberation Army scouted the path ahead, leading his revolutionary forces through the dense and dangerous Cuban wilderness. The cold air of 1986 hangs over the Warsaw East train station in Poland, where commuters moved through the gray morning light in a city caught between its historic past and the shifting political winds of the late Soviet era. Taking a brief and heavy-lidded pause during the Ardennes offensive of 1944, weary soldiers of the Waffen-SS shared a smoke in the bitter cold, their faces etched with the exhaustion of a campaign that was rapidly turning against them. In the desperate final months of 1944, a Wehrmacht officer utilized a wrecked T-34 tank to show a member of the Volkssturm how to use magnetic grenades, teaching old men and boys how to fight against the advancing Soviet armor. Dressed in her elaborate show outfit around 1890, the legendary Welsh strongwoman Miriam Kate Williams, known as Vulcana, prepared to dazzle audiences with her incredible feats of strength that challenged the social norms of the Victorian era. The neon. Future of Nevada was barely a dream in 1955, as this wide view of the Las Vegas Strip shows a dusty landscape with only a few iconic hotels rising from the desert floor before the city's massive transformation. At the President's Ranch on January 2, 1964, White House photographer Yoichi Okamoto turned the lens on himself for a unique self-portrait, while a curious Lyndon Johnson looked on, capturing a rare moment of levity behind the scenes. Living through the hardships of 1938, the wife of a coal miner sits with 3 of her children in a humble home, their expressions reflecting the quiet resilience of American families struggling to survive the tail end of the Great Depression. The roar of the crowd echoed through Philadelphia on April 12, 1967, as Wilt Chamberlain and the 76ers celebrated a monumental victory over the Boston Celtics, securing their place in the Eastern Division Finals with a legendary performance. In the final year of the Great War, Winston Churchill walked alongside a group of dedicated female workers in 1918, acknowledging the vital role women played in the factories and industries that sustained the British military throughout the conflict. The counterculture movement hit a boiling point in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury on April 3, 1967, as a woman was taken into custody for unlawful assembly during a period of intense social upheaval and youthful rebellion in the city. In a terrifying moment from July 1941, a woman fled through the streets of Lviv while being pursued by men and youth armed with clubs, marking the beginning of a horrific wave of violence during the occupation of Ukraine. Captured in the refined setting of a Rio de Janeiro studio in 1862, this elegant portrait of a Brazilian woman showcases the intricate lace and sophisticated fashion of the high society that flourished under the reign of Emperor Pedro II. Amidst the forced confinement of the Manzanar concentration camp in 1942, Japanese American women found a sense of community and normalcy by playing softball, turning a dusty field into a place of brief escape and resilient athletic spirit. High above the streets of New York in the 1930s, fearless workers balanced on narrow steel beams to build the Empire State Building, risking their lives daily to construct a skyscraper that would become a symbol of American ambition. As the shipyard gates swung open for lunch in 1944, Glasgow, a flood of workers poured out for a brief rest, leaving behind the massive skeletons of ships and towering timber scaffolding that defined Scotland's wartime industrial landscape. Working under the open sky of Lewiston, Idaho in 1891, a crew of laborers painstakingly laid heavy wooden pipes into the earth, building the essential water infrastructure that would allow the small frontier town to grow and prosper. Defying the Tennessee National Guard in 1968, striking sanitation workers marched through the streets of Memphis with "I am a man" signs demanding dignity and fair wages in a protest that became a cornerstone of the civil rights movement. In a scene that would later become a symbol of industrial, when tragedy workers in 1962 Western Australia shoveled raw blue asbestos into drums during a competition completely unaware of the deadly health risks lingering in the dust around them. Sorting through a mountain of letters in 1947, a dedicated mail clerk worked the floor of a busy American post office, a job he would faithfully perform for 30 years as the heartbeat of the nation's written communication. On a somber Christmas day in 1944, a wounded American sergeant in the Philippines reached out to feed his injured comrade, proving that even in the heat of the Pacific Theater, the spirit of brotherhood and compassion never faltered. In a Berlin hospital during the 1940s, wounded German soldiers gathered around a flickering screen to watch an experimental television broadcast, witnessing the birth of a new medium while recovering from the scars of the front lines. The shadows of conflict fell early on these young Jewish boys in Hebron in August 1929 as they sat wounded following a period of intense and tragic communal violence that would leave a lasting mark on the region's complex history. Traveling through the countryside, this Yenish family maintained their traditional nomadic lifestyle, moving with their horse-drawn wagon and carrying their entire world with them as they navigated the changing social landscape of early 20th century Europe. In 1945, a young German anti-aircraft gunner sat in an American re-education camp, his youthful face reflecting the shock of defeat and the beginning of a long journey to unlearn the ideologies of the fallen Third Reich. The streets of Afghanistan were filled with fervor in 1979 as young supporters of the communist government celebrated the first anniversary of the April Revolution, waving flags and cheering for a future that would soon be tested by war. Colorized to bring the past to life, this 1943 portrait of Marshal Josip Broz Tito captures the Yugoslav partisan leader during the height of the resistance years before he would become the president and architect of a unified Yugoslavia. Written in bold chalk upon a massive German artillery shell in 1941, the defiant message promised 1,000 more shots toward Moscow as the invading forces pushed deep into Soviet territory during the initial stages of Operation Barbarossa. Standing before the lens of Clement, Lindley ragged sometime before 1906 a group of Loyalty Island natives posed in their traditional attire, offering a rare and dignified glimpse into the indigenous cultures of the South Pacific Islands. In 1959, a full-sized boilerplate Project Mercury spacecraft was hoisted into position for rigorous testing, serving as a vital precursor to the historic missions that would eventually carry the first American astronauts into the vastness of space. Exhausted from the intensity of Pacific flight operations, in November 1944, Navy pilots John Cantrell and John Carter caught a few precious moments of sleep in their carrier's ready room, leaning against their gear in a rare, quiet moment. The vibrant colors of the Arbat district in Moscow come to life in this late 1970s view, showing people while moving past historic buildings and through the heart of the Soviet capital during a period of relative urban stability. In a quiet Pennsylvania classroom in 1901, students at the Indian Industrial School sat for a conversation lesson focused on a single chair part of a controversial government effort to assimilate indigenous children into Western culture. Inside the massive supersonic wind tunnel in 1957, engineers at the Lewis Flight Propulsion Laboratory meticulously checked a scale model of an aircraft using cutting-edge technology to push the boundaries of speed and aerospace engineering. Catering to the gentlemen of New York in the 1950s, the Fat Men's Shop stood as a unique neighborhood fixture, offering tailored clothing and a welcoming atmosphere for customers who, I struggled to find their size in standard department stores. On December 30, 1943, Frank Whittle sat at his desk at the Ministry of Aircraft Production and adjusted his slide rule, performing the complex calculations that would lead to the development of the revolutionary jet engine. Sitting with a heavy heart and a clouded gaze in 1932, a blinded World War I veteran held a sign that simply stated his sacrifice, reminding passers-by in the United States of the enduring physical cost of the Great War. In 1905, Japanese schoolboys were filmed practicing drills with dummy guns, a part of their daily education intended to prepare the nation's future generation for the defense of their country during a time of rising military pride. With total focus and determination, astronaut John Glenn ran through a training exercise inside the Mercury Procedures Trainer at Langley Field in 1960, preparing his body and mind for the historic feat of orbiting the Earth. The massive scale of the 30 by 60 full-scale tunnel at Langley Research Center is revealed in 1944 as a Sikorsky helicopter sits inside undergoing aerodynamic testing to improve the performance of early rotary wing aircraft for the military. During the fleet review at Hampton Roads around 1893, male orderlies from various nations stood together in their distinctive uniforms, representing a moment of international cooperation and the vital importance of global communication at the turn of the century. The misty peaks of Peru frame this breathtaking 1927 aerial view of Machu Picchu captured by photographer Martin Chambi to showcase the ancient Inca citadel's stunning harmony with the rugged mountains that kept it hidden for centuries. In a moment that sealed a fragile peace in 1941, Soviet People's Commissar Vyacheslav Molotov signed the Neutrality Pact with Japan, a strategic diplomatic move intended to secure the USSR's eastern border as war loomed in the West. Recalling his final moments of wholeness in 1945, James Conboy Jr. remembered Robert Capa asking him to stand for a photo, a snapshot that would become the last image of his leg before he was wounded in battle. Known as the Tank Boy during the liberation of Paris in 1944, a young French child was famously photographed by Robert Capa in Chartres, capturing the innocent face of a nation finally emerging from years of German occupation. Under the hot sun of 1939, a worker for the Texas Gulf Sulphur Company used a heavy shovel to break off chunks of hardened sulfur from a massive vat, performing the grueling manual labor that fueled the chemical industry. The heartbreak of a nation is etched on the face of the weeping Frenchman in 1940 as he watches German forces in Marseille lower the French flag and replace it with the swastika during the fall of France. In the middle of Times Square in 1918, members of the Women's Reserve Camouflage Corps painted the war-saving Stamp Theater, using their artistic skills to create bold patterns that helped raise vital funds for the American war effort. The political world was shaken in 1974 when it was revealed that Günther Guillaume, down a close aide to German Chancellor Willy Brandt, was actually an East German spy, leading to a massive scandal and Brandt's eventual resignation. Travelers ventured into the heart of the Yucatan in 1921 to visit the ancient Maya site of Uxmal, marveling at the weathered stone pyramids and intricate carvings that had stood as silent witnesses to history for over 1,000 years. The skyline of Tokyo in 1945 was a haunting landscape of scorched earth and skeletal structures, showing the devastating aftermath of the firebombing raids that transformed the bustling Japanese capital into a sea of ruins and ash. Navigating the muddy terrain of Arkansas in January 1943, a tractor pulled a mud boat to transport clearing crews into the Bouf River Basin, where Japanese-American internees were forced to perform grueling labor at the Jerome Relocation Center. Trams rattled along the North Circular Road in Dublin between 1937 and 1940, serving as the reliable pulse of the city's transport system as commuters moved through the historic streets of the Irish capital during the pre-war years. Positioned on the west bank of the Han River on May 31, 1940, troops of the Japanese 18th Infantry Regiment prepared for a heavy assault during the Battle of Zhaoyang-Yichang, a major engagement in the ongoing conflict in China. In a bizarre scene from 1940, a heavy truck came to rest atop a mangled car after a spectacular accident serving as a stark reminder of the dangers on the road during the early years of automotive travel. Leaders from 12 nations gathered in Washington, D.C. on April 4, 1949 to sign the NATO Treaty, a historic agreement that created a powerful military alliance and reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the post-war world. Dressed in stolen uniforms, 2 British SOE agents posed as German military police in April 1944, a daring and dangerous disguise used as part of a high-stakes mission to kidnap a German general from the island of Crete. Standing tall beside American photographer James Ricalton in 1932, Kashmiri Guards became a striking part of the Imperial Delhi Durbar, an elaborate celebration marking the succession of Edward VII as Emperor of British India. In the humid air of Luzon in April 1945, PP-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs lined the maintenance area of Lingayen Airfield, where mechanics worked around the I-ice clock to keep the American air power ready for the final push.